Welcome to Website and TV. I'm here with Jamie Alberico, who is the SEO product owner for Arrow Electronics, focusing on global e-commerce. I'm going to talk about some of the really important technical aspects to think about when you're running international sites. Hey Jamie, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So there is a lot to consider from any SEO point of view, and certainly when you're doing international, there are always a lot of kind of different things to consider. So what are some of or what is the first key thing that you would say to anybody managing global SEO?
Get deep in your stack, make allies. When you want to have a really successful international SEO presence that involves having clusters of servers around the world, frequently CDNs, complex pieces of code to handle this logic, there's no way that we can understand it all as an SEO. We're constantly pivoting, so making allies, understanding that this person knows this technology better than you and when to ask them and how to ask that question. Key.
And that is often kind of the challenge that people feel in any kind of business, is how to best get the different parts of the business to work together and how to persuade other areas who've got their own focus and projects to invest in SEO and to help support the SEO efforts. So what tips could you have for how to best do that?
So I work as a product owner, and I do this across multiple dev teams and projects. Frequently, unless it's something that is dire in production, I will focus on their next initiative and look at the foundations they're laying or the enhancement they're making and find ways to help that work. So proposing or pivoting SEO instead of being a task that you work on as being an enhancement to the task you're working on.
Okay, so it's all about the positioning and this approach that you take.
I'm your ally, be my friend.
Yeah,
yes.
Always about being friends. And anything else then, other kind of key points that you would say, any other fundamentals that if you don't get right, you're going to have real problems with?
Absolutely. Your CDNs and your load balancers can be quite problematic. If they are public facing and they are accessible, it doesn't matter that you didn't tell Googlebot to crawl them. Googlebot will find them.
Yeah.
And then you have duplicate versions of your site. And of course, that's going to create some cannibalization issues. Frequently, Googlebot's very good about identifying it, but it's even that visibility. So verify every public facing IP.
Yeah, don't rely on Google to try and do it for you. Make sure you're giving them the right information.
Well, it's so simple. Just verify it in Search Console. And then spin that up, add that piece of HTML to verify, add the DNS record into play. And that way, if it shouldn't be public facing and it suddenly is, your first eye's on it. You don't find out about it 3 months later.
Yeah, absolutely. Always being able to head these things off before they cause you any real problems are going to save you time. And
I think visibility is probably the key consideration here for a technical foundation.
Yeah. And that's also a big challenge when you're working on multiple sites across, different countries, across different search engines as well. It's how to, finding ways that you can keep on top of it all without it taking too much of your time, because otherwise it could become quite all-encompassing and take away time from, all your other important tasks.
Absolutely. I think automation is going to see a big uptick here soon. Even the simple ability to make sure that server A matches B and C. And when we replicate our code across servers, there are different ways of doing it, and some of them basically involve copying from one cluster to another in almost a daisy chain. And when this happens, sometimes one of them doesn't feel like getting it right. So you're like, why does this one not have AMP on it? Oh no. But automated tests that go ahead and check the parity across them can be a lifesaver, because it's very tricky. If you've got a cluster with 4 servers in it and one of them isn't right, you're playing a game of quantum weirdness.
Yeah.
Something is wrong about 25% of the time and extremely difficult to replicate.
Yeah. And you mentioned AMP there, and that's something that's become very important, and it's also something that when we're talking internationally, thinking about mobile is perhaps more crucial than if you're just working in, say, the US or the UK. Why is that the case, and what things can you do to really improve your mobile speeds and presence?
So AMP came up as a solution because we ship heavy pages with a lot of JavaScript, with a lot of CSS. That takes time to download, parse, execute. And when we're on mobile devices, like much of our international audience, it's extra long. It's about 5 times as long from a desktop. So AMP was a way of going, we're going to take the hero content, the reason the person came here, and get them to them as quickly as possible. I don't foresee AMP being a long-term solution. I do see PWAs working in our future as a great solution for any user, because instead of shipping out JavaScript, you're using native capabilities in the browser. Smaller sizes to ship, faster experience for users. You keep them focused on the goal, they're more likely to convert. If they are distracted or feel that their needs not being met, they don't really have an incentive to stay.
And that's always the challenge from an international perspective. You know, if you're a retailer based in one market and you're trying to target many, there's a lot of competition both internationally and locally, and it's really important that you make them feel that you care about their market, that they're not just a tag on. And one example of that is a slow page that doesn't really work, that they can't access. They think,
a slow page or a bad translation.
Yeah.
Bad translations, very, very telling about your business priorities. Like, we want your money, but we didn't care enough to go ahead and make it in a way that you understand.
Yeah, and certainly when you're actually a transactional website wanting somebody to give you their details and make a payment, then that's not going to happen, is it? If they can't really read what you've written. Or
I don't trust you enough to translate the description of this product. I'm not going to trust you enough to give you my credit card.
Yeah. So how, when, the big challenge for e-commerce sites especially is translation, because just of the vast quantities of products and the regular changes that you have. So how do you manage that to make sure that it's up to date, it's relevant, it's localized as well as translated, but also it's efficient?
Focus on your hero content, on the reason the person came there. On most product detail pages, we'll have our hero content, our price, our description, photos, information about it. Translate those first. Our supplementary content, things that may be intended to help a user who's not quite ready to purchase, they're ultimately valuable, but bang for the buck, that 20% of product that makes 80% of your money, hero content. Start there. And then once you have a business case for it, you can show successfully, we made this investment, we got this much back. You get more momentum behind it from the key stakeholders who sign the checkbook.
Yeah. And it is an expensive business when you're trying to translate into a lot of languages, but without doubt it gives a return because it's so important. How do you kind of verify and check a translation then and make sure that it's going to be good? Because there's a lot of automated solutions for pulling in content, pushing it out there, and I don't mean to Google Translate, but I mean ways to kind of, make sure that content's ticking over quickly. But how can you kind of verify it without having somebody having to read every single listing?
So we have teams, and I'm lucky enough to work with teams that translate.
Yeah.
So they handle that piece of it. We have native speakers who go through. There are scenarios where they do larger, not necessarily automated, but larger translations from a third-party company. So when we get human eyes on it, someone who speaks that native language and can identify that's not what that means. It's very helpful. So if you have to rely on that method, at least have a native speaker be your governance in that system and go, these aren't quite right. This wouldn't make sense to someone who's actually looking for this.
And then we mentioned before about there being, different search engines. While Google's the biggest, it's not the only one. From an SEO point of view, what are the biggest things to be aware of when you are trying to get your site ranking in Yandex, Baidu, and not just in Google?
They cannot parse JavaScript. So if your site is heavily driven with JavaScript, you're using a framework like Angular, Vue, React, they can understand that. And this really makes it important to put your hero content in the HTML. So if that's available in the initial source, we don't have to worry about that. If it's not, it's a lot more guessing game. I know the rules are different for every engine. Baidu doesn't necessarily have the separation of church and state that we see with Google, where paid and organic are two independent variables. They're much more linked there. I mean, Baidu's a whole different beast in itself. We're lucky enough to have an agency help us with .cn.
Yeah, and that's the other quite important tip. You can do maybe some things in-house, but you've got to understand where your kind of capabilities end or where your expertise just can't be as good as someone else, and make sure you're getting the right advice.
We've got 6 million products in 7 languages. I'm willing to acquiesce that there are far smarter people than me when it comes to operating within Baidu.
Yeah. So any final kind of tips we haven't covered, any other areas that you would say are absolutely key when you're working on an international project?
Consider in your site structure, how does it break now? Not does it break, how does it break? Because as you go ahead and internationalize and you create more versions of that, they will be magnified. What was once a one-off problem is now a one-off problem in 5 languages. And there might be other dependencies depending if you're using a new CMS instance or a new code base. So consider holistically, how do you reconcile and manage all of them in a systematic way? If you are relying on one-offs, it's not scalable, and ultimately you can take that step back and make the new tech reinvestment to get them on the same page. That's
a really great tip, and I think something that probably gets overlooked quite a lot and comes back to bite further down the line.
Hreflangs are hard enough as it is. Never
Yeah.
mind when we don't have URL parity.
And I think that's also the thing. Even if you're not international now, if there's any possible chance you may go that way, start to think about these things because,
Allow yourself and your business the room to grow.
Yeah, rather than giving yourself more problems to deal with.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, thank you so much for sharing your tips today.
Thank you.
Thanks.